والآن يسرنا أن نبدأ حلقة النقاش الثالثة لمؤتمرنا هذا، وهي بعنوان أهم الاتجاهات العالمية للاستثمار الجريء. ويترأس هذه الحلقة الأستاذ سيث إدوارد هاوبن المدير العام لGSV لابس بوسطن، وبمشاركة المتحدثين الأستاذ لوبن بامبولوف شريك شركة GSV لإدارة الأصول، والأستاذ براين سكيري شريك شركة رابتشر كابيتال، والأستاذ ريتشارد هاريس رئيس الاستثمارات المشتركة بشركة جي سكويرد، والأستاذ ريان سندي مدير التمويل الجريء بهيئة المنشآت الصغيرة والمتوسطة. فلنرحب بهم جميعا.
Assalamu alaikum. First, just like to say thank you to Dr. Khalid and Riyadh Valley Company for putting on this great event, their exceptional hospitality, and for inviting us to speak here today. My name is Seth Halbin. I'm the Managing Director of GSV Labs Boston. As Slater mentioned, GSV Labs is a global innovation platform that helps accelerate startups and connect corporations and investors to the most innovative technologies of tomorrow. We have a great panel today on the top trends in venture capital investing. This is a fun topic where we'll cover and discuss the trends of tomorrow, and with the goal of hopefully kind of best identifying what opportunity looks like today as well as in the years to come. So we're extremely fortunate to have a world-class panel with both a global and regional perspective on investing. The portfolios of our panelists include cutting-edge, early-stage technology companies, global sports brands, AS Roma, the Boston Celtics, as well as blue-chip technology companies, Uber, Airbnb, Spotify, Palantir, SpaceX, and many more. So before we get started, we'd just love the opportunity to give each panelist a minute or two to just take a moment and introduce themselves and their background. Lubin.
Thank you. So I'm Lubin Pampolov, co-founder and partner of GSV Asset Management, based in Silicon Valley, and I'm actually based in Paris. GSV is investing in emerging growth private companies around the world. We have about $1 billion under management, and we look at disruptive and innovative industries such as education technology, sharing economy, cloud computing, AI, and kind of all within that.
Right.
Morning. Brian Scarry of the Raptor Group. Raptor is a Boston-based private investment firm backed by the family office of Jim Pilata. Jim comes from a very successful hedge fund background.
Thank you. Raptor today has a portfolio of close to 100 investments, many directly and a handful of funds. We invest in media and sports companies, as Seth alluded to, Italian football club AS Roma, American NBA basketball team Boston Celtics, healthcare, real estate, financial services, but almost everything we do, I feel, has a technology element. We're very much early stage tech investors, which makes me very excited to be here today, and want to thank Seth and his team and RVC for inviting Raptor to participate.
Hello, thank you, RVC, GSV, and Saudi Arabia. Richard Harris, I'm a partner with G Squared. We're considered, a multi-billion-dollar fund manager. We've invested into companies that Seth mentioned before: Spotify, Airbnb, Lyft, Uber, Postmates, Pinterest, and it goes on. We invest differently than our growth investing peers, meaning that we do provide growth capital, but we also try and solve a problem that our companies are facing. I think one of the panelists earlier, Craig, he mentioned something about the companies staying private longer, which is creating several, problems for companies that are going into 10, 12, sometimes 15 years. So the way we invest our capital is fundamentally different, but we hope to add a service to these large late-stage growth investors. We're on our fourth fund, and yeah, we invest around $500 million to $1 billion a year.
Good morning and thank you شركة وادي الرياض. اسمي ريان سندي. I work at منشآت. Actually right now the Saudi venture capital company which was created earlier this year. The head of the co-matching fund where we co-match with angel investors, venture capital maybe, and also accelerators, especially at the early stage, seed and pre-Series A, sometimes Series A. Our main goal of this initiative is to leverage the investors and help entrepreneurs to get more funding and drive their ventures. And that's the initiative just started now, and hopefully we're looking forward to enrich the ecosystem.
Wonderful, thank you. The first question, I think this conference and the topics we're covering today really allude to the point that innovation is going global. There's a globalization of innovation and entrepreneurship. So, as we think about trends, where are deals being sourced from today as opposed to 2 years ago where you might have been looking? This is a great panel to kind of speak to that as the location of the panelists. We're global. We're investing in the U.S. as well as the world. So, Lubin, if you could just kind of start us out with your thoughts.
Sure. So basically, by the way, GSV stands for Global Silicon Valley, and so the thesis behind the firm is that Silicon Valley is no longer a physical spot between San Francisco and San Jose. It's really a global mindset that's spreading fast. And certainly today, when you look at how easy it is to start something, you're starting to see these different ecosystems around the world where capital is available, where you have high-quality universities, you have talent, and people see that they can create something new and really scale it with the ecosystem they have around them. And so certainly today, you start to see more and more of those spots around the world emerge. It used to be that previously you would raise money either from Silicon Valley or New York or London. Today you have 10 or 15 different spots in Europe, not to mention China, and obviously the Middle East is starting to also look at this trend, and there starts to be kind of an establishment of an ecosystem locally. So I think more and more as we go forward, you're going to see successful companies being created in places you wouldn't have thought historically that there would be anything coming out of there.
And then, so Brian, as it kind of relates to that question, I'm curious as kind of the earliest stage kind of global investor, where you're looking, where kind of pockets of companies that you're looking at are coming from.
Sure, and this answer may come a little bit through a biased lens, and I don't want to pick any fights with my friends in Silicon Valley or on the West Coast, but being a Boston-based firm, and I tip my cap for you folks for opening an office in Boston, we believe there's a ton of innovation and opportunities that come out of the universities and medical institutions in our backyard. I think a gentleman on the panel before referenced Pittsburgh. So my principal's on the board of the MIT Media Lab. We're down the road from some of the best hospitals, research spots in the world, and Harvard University is a hop, skip, and a jump for us. So I think the universities, medical research facilities, with healthcare being a large and growing market, are two obvious places that can produce entrepreneurs and kind of next stage innovation.
And Richard, just from kind of your lens of kind of being based in Zurich and how you're kind of looking at it, opportunities globally.
Yeah, I mean, our power alley is really companies that are, valued at between 500 million and call it 2 billion. And 75% of our investments will be North America based. Historically, that's been the ratio. We made a few investments last year into Europe, and we also made one investment into China. And we continue to see a lot of companies fall into our wheelhouse in kind of these hyper-growth markets such as India and China. And we also have started to add a few companies from the GCC on our radar that we're starting to track.
Wonderful. And Ryan, as it relates to kind of the local market, I'm curious if, from 2 years ago to today, is there a trend in terms of cities, regions that you're seeing opportunities come out of?
Actually, it has changed a lot in the past 2 years. Since I joined Munshaat and since when Munshaat was started 2 years ago, while we're designing our initiative and the programs, what I understood from the investors, they used to source the deals from, just referrals and friends and meeting in, local shops or whatever. Right now, after 2 years now, they started, and I'm seeing most of the deal flow comes out of accelerators, because the number of accelerators has increased, come out from universities as well, incubators, more of like institutionalized, better than 2 years ago. Not as that quality and volume as the globally, but I can see that there's a trend, and I can assure you guys, like the next 2 to 3 years, it'll be a lot coming out from that in terms of quality and quantity comes from accelerators and universities.
That's exciting. Yeah, thank you. And, so kind of moving on from the globalization trend to the technology trend. So, I'd love to get everyone's perspective on the top trends in technology that we're seeing. Obviously, there's a lot of kind of hype over certain technologies entering the market in the last couple of years, and as it relates to, call it 2 to 3 years ago and what those trends might have been. So, Lubin, if you could just get us started.
Sure. I'll pick a few. So, AI obviously has been there for a long time, but I think today with the power of computing and just how quickly you can distribute something around the world, we're at a place where this is really starting to affect many different industries meaningfully. And certainly that is one area where, while it's broad, there are different applications within that are starting to be extremely interesting from an investment standpoint and also from a value creation standpoint. Education, which is another big area for us to focus on, is certainly getting disrupted is certainly benefiting from the disruption of AI, given that there's an enormous shortage of people having the knowledge to code and to program computers and to use algorithms. So as AI is disrupting many jobs and eliminating jobs, at the same time there's an enormous opportunity from the education side of things to retrain and have people learn the basics of coding and programming. So that is one kind of big area for us where we're focused on. I think the other meaningful area is still the sharing economy, which really started about 10 years ago in the way it is today with Airbnb and Uber and Lyft. It's interesting just to see the kind of the latest applications of that being the scooter sharing businesses that went from zero to now scale that Uber and Lyft had in their 4th or 5th year within just a year of time. And it's, you're starting to see some incredible pace in the way that companies are getting created and services are getting adopted.
Thank you. Brian, if you can just...
Yeah, no, and I would echo that the pace on some of the innovation. It's happening fast and it's happening now. My principal has spent quite a bit of time, and I've become somewhat personally fascinated in the machine learning space. We have a significant investment in a hedge fund type firm that's actually using machine learning to predict future asset prices. And when I sit down with our team of very bright folks, PhD physicists, they talk about machine learning from speech recognition to facial recognition now being applied to financial markets. And when I leave that office, they always say, this isn't something that's happening 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. It's all happening now. And it's going to be interesting to see what are the jobs of tomorrow because everything's being disrupted and being disrupted quite quickly.
No, thank you. Richard, from your standpoint.
Yeah, I agree with Lubin. I think the shared economy is interesting. General marketplaces, this whole concept of on-demand right now is just fascinating, and I don't think it's going anywhere. We also consider ourselves, experts in the transportation 2.0 space, meaning, how you get from point A to point B is going to be fundamentally different in 5 years than it is right now. So, you know, these are two areas that we continue to invest.
Thank you. And so, Ryan, you know, I'm curious from kind of a local lens. You know, we've identified machine learning, AI. You know, we've left out one we'll circle back to shortly. But, you know, from the early stage companies you're seeing, are they adopting kind of these cutting edge technologies, or is it kind of, you know, alluded to earlier, more energy focused and stuff like that?
Well, there's no doubt that machine learning and AI, it's the hot trend and hot topic, and everyone is investing globally in that. And but if you talk about here in Saudi, maybe it's still a little bit picking up. However, most of the technologies that is focusing and what you're also looking at, anything that evolves around the Vision 2030. As you everyone aware that Vision 2030 is an ambitious goal that we're looking forward to achieve. There are so many, there are like few priority sectors that we focus on, like Hajj and Umrah. It's one of the top priorities. So anything that technology that helps enable the Hajis and pilgrims to come and ease up their lives, that would be great. The education, healthcare, even entertainment, anything that surrounds an entertainment, technology as well, like gaming, that's all, everything that's, it's increasing, we can see that. And also the fintech. Now, there's a lot of initiatives and programs that wants to enable the fintech and technology, which is it's a virgin market here yet, and it's going to scale as well. So that's kind of the technology that we can see right now here in Saudi.
Awesome, thank you. And you know, we're not moving on yet, as I feel like one was left out, but blockchain. You know, how are we thinking about it? Obviously, you know, it's been a roller coaster over the last year or two, and kind of where it plays in the technology trends and kind of the, you know, the opportunity to change markets, but where does it stand? So, Ryan, if you could kind of get us started with the local lens, and if we're seeing anything kind of being done in blockchain, crypto, uncrypto related.
If I heard you correctly, you're asking about the blockchain here in Saudi?
Correct. The technology of blockchain, and if there's been adoption.
In my point of view, I did not see that yet, because that technology, it still needs a lot of enhancement. It needs a lot of unique set of skills that we did not see here yet. Maybe there are a few good and intelligent entrepreneurs and engineers, but it's not that mass as in globally. But in related to fintech, there's a lot of the young people are very adaptive to that technology. They have super information background about the blockchain and how to use it globally. But here, maybe also the regulation is not yet adaptive as the globally, but it's picking up. But, you know.
Awesome. Thank you. And Richard.
I also was going to say, you know, expanding on blockchain, just the notion of big data, which, you know, one would argue that oil drove the last century in terms of, you know, innovation and value, but big data arguably will be the next generation of, you know, as information will become more and more valuable. And, you know, machine learning, AI, blockchain, it all has to do with collecting data. So.
Awesome. And Brian, from an early stage standpoint, kind of what you're saying?
Sure. You know, I would say my firm anyways, we're a believer in this technology, in blockchain, and I know you bucketed crypto in as well. We're coin agnostic. I wouldn't tell you if Bitcoin's going up or down tomorrow, but you know, we think there's utilization for all this technology. You know, when we get shown deals, I think one of the things you need to be careful of, because it is so early in the space, people are talking about using blockchain technology for XYZ, and you know, we just want to make sure that XYZ is actually a problem that's being solved for. But listen, I think it's interesting. It's constantly innovating and changing, and you know, we feel it's not going anywhere anytime soon.
Got it. And then, you know, Lubin, on the topic, and then as it manifests as obviously a later stage investor, and you know, when you anticipate to kind of see stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting if you look at blockchain, how it's evolved over the last, call it 7-8 years, ever since kind of Bitcoin was created. It certainly shows a very similar pattern to the internet in the early days, where you had the hype phase up until a year ago, and now you're kind of in this settle back phase where a lot of, I would say, noise and also trash gets filtered out. And I think, I'm certainly a long-term believer that this is going to be an infrastructure that will drive a lot of things that we do, serving as a marketplace or as a currency kind of facilitator or so many different applications. But today, it just seems like we're not seeing the emergence of real solid companies just yet. At least, that's how I feel. And we are certainly very focused on being smart about who are the companies to focus on, what are the specific applications of blockchain we should be looking at, and starting to identify when those really start to gain some real momentum.
Wonderful, thank you. And as we kind of talk technology, I just want to dig a little deeper on kind of AI. As this is a technology set that it can have in the years to come just tremendous effect on the current workforce and kind of where it goes from here. And I think the recent stat has an opportunity to kind of disrupt $33 trillion of kind of employment activity. So, I'm curious, as you see the trend of AI kind of being deployed and what that means for kind of the workforce of today as well as tomorrow. Lubin?
Well, it's on one hand it's scary because the pace of disruption is increasing. It's getting faster. Companies are looking at ways to react, and obviously, if you look at Amazon and the thousands, it's like tens of thousands of robots that they employ today, which 10 years ago used to be workers. So in one way, it's really scary, and that's why there is an enormous problem, but at the same time, a very strong opportunity for readapting the workforce, for retraining the workforce, for making sure that students, as they come out of college, they're actually getting prepared for jobs that will be relevant in the next 5 to 10 years. The problem today, in universities in the US is over 50% of students come out of college and they just learn something and spend a lot of money on, which is not relevant to what they're going to do. So significant problems being created at the same time that creates also very significant opportunities. And so we're investor in Coursera, which is the leading online learning platform, which is first of all founded by probably the #1 leader in artificial intelligence, Andrew Ng. And also a very large portion of the content and the studying on Coursera is actually on big data and AI, and so certainly a very strong trend we're seeing.
It's fascinating. Brian, if you have any?
Yeah, I might be a little repetitive here, but I think the word scary, certainly initially is spot on. I think my children will be fine. I don't know what my grandchildren will do for work because it is happening so fast. I think AI is disrupting almost every industry. Certainly technology on a bigger scale. Even if you think you're buying a brick and mortar building on Fifth Avenue in New York, a month later WeWork will come in and disrupt the whole lease scenario with 10 tech companies. I'll use an example from one of my favorite movies, Seth. I don't know if you've seen Willy Wonka, the Chocolate Factory. There's a scene in there with one of the gentlemen that works in the factory automated packages the candy bars. And the candy comes through, and they put it in the box, and the candy comes through and put it in the box. In the next scene, they bring in the machine. The automated machine puts the candy in the box, and now all these folks are out of work. Very sad scene. Fast forward to the next scene, the machine breaks down, and the people are invited back to actually fix the machine. So there's going to be a disruption as all this comes into play, so it is a little spooky initially. But I think it was Ray Dalio who said that the strongest forces in the universe is evolution. So folks will kind of figure it out. I'm just not smart enough to be that person to do so.
Thank you, Rich.
Yeah, no, I think AI is self-improving every day, and as Brian mentioned, it's quite scary in one hand, but it's also going to lead to some amazing breakthroughs in medicine, in transportation, and it's you're now seeing one AI duel with another AI, which is it's hard to imagine, but for example, one AI creates an image, and the other AI tries to decipher whether that image is real or not. So the whole notion of AI self-improvement is actually quite fascinating, but ultimately, I think over the next 12, 24 months, we're going to see some very interesting breakthroughs.
Great. And Ian, if you have any kind of color on AI from the
Like all my colleagues already mentioned that, I'm going to share the same view with them. I mean, yeah, it is, AI is evolving and it's improving. Every year there's a massive improvements that's going on. It's a bit scary, but that's life. I mean, life has been evolved since creation. And if you remember, like in the 1800s, when the industrial age was there's some odd jobs were eliminated and new jobs were created. And I think that's going to also happen. So it's a bit scary, yes, because everyone likes to be in norm. However, we should embrace in changes. We should invest more in AI, and that's our vision and our mission and goal to invest in new technologies and ride the trend with the world. And yep.
Yeah. No. Awesome. Sorry.
Yeah. Just as I'm thinking about it, when you consider the self-driving car, obviously it's driven by AI, and the problem it might solve in the next 20 to 30 years. So cars today are used about 2% of the time, and 98% of the time they're actually standing parked on the street. Therefore, cities are built, with a lot of streets, with car parkings, and that's a typical city today. Think about what will happen once you have only self-driving cars that will be used permanently through platforms like Uber, Lyft, and Careem, and all the others, and then suddenly you start to reduce the parking because you won't need that many more cars. It's going to be much more efficient, and suddenly you can have a totally different way cities get constructed, much more recreational and much more improved for life. So.
No, makes sense, and thank you for kind of the input. So, to kind of summarize, it sounds like it's a little frightening. There's tremendous opportunity, it can do a lot of good, and robots aren't kind of taking over the world anytime soon, hopefully. So, as that kind of relates to technology trends in AI and machine learning and blockchain, and kind of to switch to the trend of verticals and what are kind of the next verticals that can be disrupted and there's opportunity. And we alluded to some of it, Coursera and AI, and having kind of a digital education platform that can help educate the kind of the next wave of kind of students. But what are those other verticals that are kind of primed for disruption? And I would love to start kind of down as obviously, the local economy is heavy energy driven. What are the next verticals that you see have kind of opportunity?
Yeah, like you mentioned, yes, we are heavily dependent on energy. However, the Vision 2030 focuses more to diversify away from energy. We try to, get technology, enable the people to invest in technology, and also create new technologies. And if you can see our investments in the Vision Fund and investments when Prince Mohammed went to the U.S. and Europe and invested in these big technology companies to import it and have it here in Saudi. That's kind of like the vision and the mission that Saudi is embracing is like, okay, we need to diversify away from energy, and we need to focus on technology because that technology, it's the future in all kind of aspects, in terms of health, in terms of education, in terms of transportation. That's what we're focusing on.
Awesome. Richard?
Yeah, it's actually a tough question because there's not many industries that you can think of that haven't been completely turned upside down or disrupted by technology. So I think most industries are now adapting and appreciating technology to their core business. We made an investment into ag tech recently. We thought that this is probably one of the last tech frontiers that hasn't been disrupted. But going forward, all these industries, now all this tech that's disrupting, whether it's fintech or ad tech or med tech, are just continuing to be either proven right or proven wrong. So
No, thank you. Makes sense. Brian?
Yeah, no, I would agree with Richard. I mean, I used the example yesterday with a colleague that the last two investments we made in the healthcare space, I would say was disruptive tech being applied to healthcare. When we bought an Italian football club, my principal would say, I didn't buy a football team, I bought a media company in one of the 5 best cities in the world, and there's all sorts of, commercialization opportunities that we can capture through technology tools that, arguably didn't exist even 2, 3 years ago. So it seems like everything's being disrupted at some level.
Great.
Yeah, I mean, typically when there is high inefficiency in an industry and for a service, at some point you get to that inflection point where suddenly one of the startups succeeds and it's really becoming powerful, gains traction very quickly, it's viral, and typically that's kind of a signal that there's going to be a lot of capital deployed and a lot more activity. I mean, just thinking about one of the presenting companies yesterday in the fintech space, why would you create a solution how to wire money from here to, I believe it was Bahrain or Yemen? Well, because you're paying 7% if you go through the traditional way through a bank, and why should you be paying 7% when it should be free, when you can basically text anyone for free? But certainly, you have the problem, and then you start to have the solutions, and obviously, you have Apple Pay and Google Wallet already broadly around the world. But just as a point, it's always the case that there is a big problem. There is high inefficiency. Typically, it's been a monopoly situation for decades, and at some point it just gets disrupted very quickly.
Great, thank you. So, keeping on the topic of trends in kind of as they relate to venture capital investing, I'm curious if, as a group of panelists, in terms of the trend of check size and kind of stage of identification, has that changed, shifted, starting at the early kind of angel rounds all the way through kind of the later stage rounds? And Lubin, if you could just get us started.
Yeah, it's certainly changing, and a major force of that is that what used to be, 10, 15 years ago, public companies is now private companies. And why is that? Well, because a lot of the public capital have come into the private space. Accordingly, private companies don't have urgency to go public anymore as fast. Therefore, they don't need to focus that much on being profitable, rather than they can choose to focus on the faster growth because they know they're going to have more capital available as they prove that they can grow fast and become more global. So the dynamics of the entire ecosystem has changed, and certainly with players like SoftBank and Sequoia and GA coming into that space, and many of the mutual funds, suddenly you have companies like an Uber, like an Ant Financial, like Didi and others, ByteDance, that are valued close to $100 billion. And I think that's not something that's going to go away. You're going to see more and more companies choose that path.
Makes sense. Brian, from your vantage?
Yeah, no, when I look at some of these kind of ticket size that are structural changes, I have two things come to mind. One is we've been GPs at my firm, we've been LPs, and there's value to the GP-LP relationship on several levels. We've also seen more and more investment opportunities where folks will ask us to invest into a holdco or an LLC structure. And actually own some of the assets that maybe an LP would not. And I think there's benefits to each model. But the other piece certainly is, and it's certainly applicable to this region, is the SoftBank model. That's, I would argue, going to disrupt things today and going forward. It's a large amount of capital, great firm, great name, great track record. Now the challenges will be how do they deploy that capital prudently. Certainly a lot of exit opportunities maybe going forward for for entrepreneurs. But I'll be interesting to see after some of these very large funds, what's the next iteration of some of these, and it's exciting because it's all happening now.
Great. Richard?
Yeah, I guess putting it simply, 10, 15 years ago, it was very rare to find a company, a private venture-backed business that was valued at over $1 billion. And I think in the year 2000, there was only one, and that was Google. Now, every month, there's on average 10 to 12 being minted, right? And in China, I read an article yesterday that every 3.5 days, there's $1 billion private company that's minted. So with what Lubin was saying, with all of that money that's now coming into the private space, means that growth that public investors like hedge funds, mutual funds, once experienced, they're going to have to go deeper and deeper into the private markets to seek that type of return. And the problem is they're writing larger and larger checks. And as they put $100 million, $200 million, sometimes $500 million into a company, the companies and the investors are becoming incredibly stressed. So if you are an early investor into Lyft, Uber, Airbnb, Pinterest, you haven't seen any sort of liquidity, right? So there's fundamental issues with early investors that have gone into these businesses that have promised returns for their LPs. So the GP-LP relationship, at one point, they're managing on average 10-year funds, and at some point there was an intersection between a liquidity event and when they return capital to their investors. Well, now a company on average is staying private oftentimes. I mean, right now on average it's about 14 years. We think it's actually going to be extending out to maybe 16 years. So the GP-LP relationship is being tested right now. And so the other issue is the employees that have been so loyal to these companies. So employee retention. There's no market for employees to properly sell their shares. So employee retention is huge, because if you work for one of the FANGs, and you have a nice, comp structure where you're getting paid $150,000, $200,000 a year, and you've got a public market. So once your shares vest, you can seek some sort of liquidity. But for a private company, they can't offer that same comp structure. There's no liquidity for the employees. So holding on to quality talent as these companies continue to stay private is a big issue. So going back to the initial question, if companies are staying private longer and there's more money going into these companies, all the way from early stage to late stage, you better be ready to participate in that value creation or that growth with whatever with whatever stage of investing you're in.
Thank you, Richard. And Ryan, do you have any?
Yeah. So from the local perspective, that's in the last 2 or 3 years, a lot of things has changed. Not in terms of, my colleagues already said, because globally they're already advanced. However, from the investor's point of view now, a lot of investors now focus on venture capital investments as an asset class. Before, investors used to, conventional investments, either like real estate or stocks where there's an actual return in cash. Right now, investors are more bold. They take more risks with entrepreneurs, valuing intellectual property. When they come discuss evaluations with entrepreneur, they actually understand the intellectual property and how they can value that. Before, we couldn't find that. Also, in terms of creating funds, right now a lot of investors are become more institutionalized investments, creating more funds, and the regulations is helping to ease that up. CMA, the Capital Market Authority, has relaxed the regulations in terms of creating funds, which now you will see in the next 2 years a lot of venture capital funds that have been creating and then will invest. So that's pretty much what's going on. It's a lot of it's a new ecosystem, and we just started, and hopefully we'll catch pace with globally soon.
Great. No, thank you. And, you know, so we've talked about a lot of individual kind of trends, and I'd like to bubble them all up into kind of one macro trend. And so don't quote me on these stats, but they're directionally correct. So in 2013, I think there were $50 billion deployed in venture capital. In 2017, I think the number was $160 billion deployed. I'm curious what we think about that trend in the next couple of years. Is it only going to continue to grow? If we see a little market setback, do we think it'll pull out? But, you know, as we've alluded to, companies staying private longer, what do we think that does to the kind of macro pool? And Ryan, if you could just start at that end and kind of come down.
Well, I'm sure globally, there's it will continue to invest more because you know, we're entrepreneurs and young people who are the one who understand the problem and try to come up with new solutions. Big companies, they're happy with the status quo. No one wants to challenge it because that's what get returns and checks. But from a local perspective, as I said earlier, it's already nascent. The ecosystem is not yet matured. We have a small percentage out of GDP in private equity and venture capital investments. And one of the main goals that was written in the Vision 2030 is to increase that number of investments. That's why Munshaat was created, and also and our department was the access of funding, where we want to increase that number of actually increase the percentage of investments in venture capital. We worked closely with, we're still working closely with the Capital Market Authority, with the Ministry of Commerce, in order to relax all these kind of regulations and enable more investing into entrepreneurs as well. So I can see the next 2 to 3 years a lot of investments, and it's growing. It will grow.
Awesome. Bullish on innovation. Richard?
Yeah, I mean, from our perspective, we look at companies like you mentioned, SoftBank, that, you know, in the last couple of years, I don't know if it was the last 2 years, invested more money into private companies than the entire NASDAQ in public stocks. So it's fascinating to see the amount of money actually going into these private businesses versus, you know, public tech companies.
Got a bullish innovation, right?
I was bullish until you gave us some of those statistics, Seth. It sounds as though you're almost calling a bubble on some of this. But no, I am, and I think a lot of it's going to be geographical speaking. It's not just going to be West Coast, Boston, New York, London. I mean, honestly, I think what you guys have done here with RBC is phenomenal. And it's just going to take patience. It's time. You know, 70 years ago, whatever the number are in the U.S., if you were well-educated, and a smart guy, you would try to get a job at IBM, one of the big firms. You know, fast forward a few years, people want to do something different, innovation, entrepreneurial culture is born. I imagine, and I could be ignorant here, you know, going back 50 years ago, some of the best and brightest students here end up at a Sama or at a Ramco. These are all great places and great jobs. But now folks, you know, everything that's being done in the kingdom here, I think, is the absolute correct playbook. They're building incubators, they're providing resources, and it's going to come here. It's just a matter of time. I've met several folks here in the kingdom on the other side of the table, if I'm showing one of our investment opportunities, and they all have better resumes than I do, they're more educated than I do, so it is just a matter of time before innovation starts coming out of this area. So when I look at growth in the space, it's going to be from places like here and beyond, not the typical spots.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, for sure there's going to be cycles, and I cannot predict when they're going to be, but long-term certainly bullish, because the fundamental trends are are there and are just becoming more and more stronger. Innovation is a very powerful trend, and it's a self-fulfilling circle, because as you have, let's say, in a couple years, the first you know, tech company out of Saudi Arabia that becomes a multi-billion-dollar company, it will set an example for more and more people that they can see, wow, with the tools, with the ecosystem, I can by myself and, you know, with a small team really create something very disruptive. And in no time, you're going to start to see more and more competition and powerful startups. I mean, if you look at how Scandinavia evolved in the last 15 years, it was because of Spotify's success. If you look at Germany, it was because of, you know, 1 or 2 companies that really gave the example. You start to see this type of situations, you know, in places like Romania or Kenya or you know, China, obviously 10 years ago. But I think that's a very powerful force, and we're going to see much more of that in the future.
Wonderful, thank you. And this has been a really kind of fun topic to discuss. Generally, there's a lot of excitement about innovation and kind of where it goes from here and the resources. It's tremendously exciting to see everything that's being done locally to support it. We're really excited to kind of over the next couple of years to watch it blossom and grow. That's all the time we have. If there are any questions for the panel, please feel free to grab any of us individually. We just don't have time to address them now, so please feel free to kind of just grab us after. It is break time. So we're done. Shukran. Thank you to the panel. Thank you to the audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth.